Before we dive into the news, I've updated my portfolio project course to iOS 26 in Liquid Glass. In this course, we build a portfolio project using SwiftUI, Swift charts, we access data from HealthKit, and we use source control all along the way, putting it up on GitHub, reviewing pull requests, merging pull requests, all that stuff. And I've just added 10 new videos covering Liquid Glass and building an AI fitness coach using foundation models that you see here that summarizes our step count data, weight data, gives us some words of encouragement and some health tips. To celebrate the update, it's 30% off until October 14th. You can check it out, link is in the description. And as always, links to everything you see in Swift News will be in the GitHub repo, and you can get Swift News into your inbox by signing up for the email newsletter. Links to both of those are also in the description. All right, let's get into the news. It's been a few weeks since the last episode as I was updating all the things for iOS 26, but to catch up, Swift 6.2 has been released with Xcode 26 and iOS 26. Now there's a ton of features, but I'm going to highlight a few that impact, the most broad iOS developers. As always, there's a lot of niche things that don't affect every project, but there's a couple here that are going to affect the vast majority of us. And the first one is approachable concurrency and making apps single-threaded by default. So what that means is when Swift 6 strict concurrency was introduced, it was concurrency everywhere. You had to manage all the concurrency, and when you wanted things on the main actor, you had to always annotate it with @main_actor. And it was just tedious and a lot of boilerplate because you could argue that the vast majority of apps don't need all that concurrency. So to make things easier and more approachable, now when you create a project, by default, everything will run on the main actor and you can introduce concurrency when you need it. And the option is still there for if you do have a project that really needs all this concurrency safety, you can still do it that way. But again, for the majority of apps, it's a lot easier to just be single threaded by default. So like I said, that is the main change. It's going to affect a lot of us. And here's the official Swift blog post, but let's go to Paul's What's New in Swift 6.2. He does this every release, always a great thorough article with code examples. So here he is talking about the control default actor isolation inference. That's a fancy way of saying everything will be run on the main actor by default. And it's a flag in your build settings. You can search for it if you have a project that was created prior to Xcode 26, because if you create a project on Xcode 26 or later, that's going to be there by default. If you have an older project, you have to go actually flip to it if you want to adopt it. And he says, yes, this is exactly as good as you're thinking. With one single change, many app developers can more or less avoid thinking about Swift concurrency until they are ready to do so. And that is a huge change. So like I said, I'll highlight a couple other changes. I mean, there's a ton in here. Feel free to read this article and go through it. But I'll highlight one or two that, again, I think are going to affect a lot of us, or we'll see improvements in our code. And the first one I want to show is a simple thing with default value and string interpolations. And this is pretty minor, but I think it's a nice quality of life improvement. So when you interpolate a string, and let's say name was nil, if you want to use that in a string, you would have to use no coalescing to give a default anonymous value. Well, now you can have the default here and pass that in. Seems like a very small change, as he says. At first glance, might not seem like a great improvement, but no coalescing doesn't work with different types. So for example, you have age. You had to do age, no coalescing into 0. You couldn't do age of an int, no coalescing into a string. So now with this default value, you can have it in here for your value and then still give a string for your default value. So again, nice little quality of life. Collection conformance to enumerated. You've probably written code like this, like for each names.enumerated. That way you can get access to the index. So then you would have value, comma, index, and then you could use that in your code. Well, now the return from enumerated conforms to collection. So now you get all the collection goodness. So you see it spits out values now, and then now you can do values.offset, values.element, because values is now a collection. So again, nice little quality of life improvement, especially for those SwiftUI for eaches. And then I'll do one more down here at the bottom with inline array. So let's scroll down here. And basically what this is, it's a fixed size array. And there's a lot of restrictions to it. So you're giving up a lot of the niceties of an array, but there's performance benefits. As always, everything's a trade-off. So you can create this by saying inline array 4 and then string, and then it's always going to be an array of 4 strings. So that means you can't do array.append, array.remove at. And if you want to iterate over it with a for loop, you have to do names.indices and use subscripting. So at first you'd be like, wow, this is like kind of like a hard to use, very restricted array. That's kind of the point, because when you restrict it and you don't allow all those other options of like adding, removing, and all the other niceties you get with the built-in array, there's a lot of overhead, well, you get a lot of performance benefits. Now, for the vast majority of apps that we're building day to day, probably a negligible, unnoticeable performance benefit. But there is no doubt plenty of circumstances where using an inline array, fixed array, to get those performance benefits will help, because sometimes every little bit of performance matters. And down at the bottom, I think Paul sums up Swift 6.2 nicely. He says, so again, Swift 6.2 is another gigantic collection of additions and improvements to the language. New features, yes, but also a range of refinements that will continue to help smooth over adoption of Swift concurrency. As usual, like I said, not all features apply to every project, but I think certainly at least one or two of these changes will grow and become standard practice. Specifically the main actor by default. I would argue that's the most impactful thing to come out of Swift 6.2. And he says it might not even be the ones you expect. Keep an eye on inline array. Next up, I wanted to share this article from Danny here, The Great Shift in Apple Development. It says, a new sweeping era has begun. And I have been feeling this, and I think this article really just kind of articulates it, what I've been thinking lately. One era is ending and a new one is beginning. So we go over some big picture stuff here. I'll scroll through quickly. As always, link will be in the GitHub repo if you want to go through and read this more thoroughly. Swift 6 and strict concurrency are now the main actor by default, but even if you do main actor by default, it doesn't mean you don't have to learn about actors. You don't have to learn about sendable, because when you do need concurrency, you do need to send something to a background thread. Yeah, you are going to need to know those concepts. They're just not forced on you by default. But anyway, this data race safe code is the new norm. He says here, knowing concurrency concepts and the tools and frameworks supporting them will no longer be just a distinguishing factor between career levels or interview questions. It's now universally required understanding. He says, thank goodness for that. So we're getting Swift 6 concurrency, a new way to write concurrent code. Liquid Glass enables fluid designs. Apple has stated Liquid Glass is a new design system. It's not just a new look, a facelift, if you will. He says this means there's a new vision and direction for how Apple wants us to design applications on its platforms. And it is a pretty big shift. It doesn't just look different. And we have to also think that we just know what's out right now. We don't know what kind of glasses are coming out, foldable phones, what else they have in store that they want to make sure that their new UI design system fits in well with. So I would argue the previous era before Liquid Glass, that was what, iOS 7 to iOS 18? That's a long era. And here we are embarking on a brand new one. It says iPad windowing and foldable phones shattered the size class conventions. We're so used to using like compact and regular, and we know there's iPhones and we have iPad and split view or slide over. Well, now with windowing, they can be any size, and then the foldable phone might have windowing as well, considering windowing is also on the iPad mini. So the combination of these new devices and form factors with Liquid Glass, again, whole new era. The focus on snippets, widgets, and intents, right? We're getting into this appless future a little bit where a lot of people interact with your app just via widget on their home screen or through app intents, shortcuts, now foundation models here in a little bit. So more and more each year, we're getting into this like appless world. And I kind of like it because as he says here, picture this, a user that wants to know the wait time for a ride at an amusement park, you got to pick up your phone, unlock your app, go to the app, navigate to the rides. It's just so much tedious steps. And I'm actually feeling this firsthand because I'm building an app that I have to check on something during like an hour period. And it's just so tedious to pick up my phone, unlock it. Even if I had a widget on my home screen, I still have to like look at it, wait for Face ID, unlock it. What I'm building is just a live activity for that in the always on display. I just have to glance at my phone. I don't even have to pick it up. So I do believe we are getting into this future where using apps won't necessarily be going in and opening up the app a lot. And then obviously there's the AI foundation models. Now, of course, they're not as powerful as ChatGPT, Gemini, because those are giant server-based models. Like this is a model on your device in your pocket, and there's plenty of advantages to that. You don't have to worry about the internet. It's fast, it's free, it's private. So when you're using people's like calendar information, their contacts, their health kit data, like all that stays private and it's all right on device. So it opens up a whole new world of small little features you can do that, yeah, it's not going to be as powerful as ChatGPT and all that stuff, but there's certainly a lot of advantage to having a private on-device model that can work offline. So a lot of big changes. It does feel like we're on this dawn of a new era. And this is also, like I said, I've been feeling this, but this article kind of like really highlighted things. It's kind of motivated me to get back into the content creation and creating more courses because so much of my content and all my courses are in the old era, the old way of doing things. So he says here, let's say you were new to iOS development and wanted to start file new project with Swift 6, iOS 26, Liquid Glass. The majority of books, resources, tutorials, like they're just not out there yet. Like he even says, the book he did last year, Swift Cookbook, it's already outdated. He did it last year. So tons of changes. Again, it does feel like we're on this dawn of a new era. I want to hear like how you feel about that. You know, Apple's always changing things because the next article plays into that as well. The dark side of iOS development and why everyone is quitting. And I'm not sure if this article is like rage bait or maybe I'm just in my indie dev small startup bubble because the author is a senior software engineer at Uber. So yeah, working on a decade-old legacy code base that's huge, tons of developers. That is a different world than even a medium-sized company or a small startup or indie dev. And yeah, I'm probably just in a bubble, but I want to hear your thoughts on this as well as your comments on this new era we're in, back to what I was just talking about with all this new stuff, because I find that exciting, but the theme of this next article is people don't like that. So we'll scroll down and go piece by piece here why everyone is quitting. And again, conversely to what we were just talking about, you're never caught up ever. The framework treadmill is breaking us. 2014, learn auto layout. 2017, master Swift forward encodable. 2019, rewrite everything in SwiftUI. 2023, learn Swift concurrency. And now 2025, liquid glass, foundation models. The cycle isn't learning, it's forced obsolescence. If you take a 6-month sabbatical, your skills are borderline deprecated. Now, this doesn't resonate with me. Like, I can see the frustration. Yeah, obviously you have to constantly learn new things, but I don't know, to me, like I've been doing this since 2014. That's kind of like what I signed up for and what like attracts me to this. You're working in technology and the only constant is change. Things are always updating. Things are always changing. Like that's what attracted me to it. So to me, that's like a feature, not a bug, but maybe I see it differently than others. Again, I would love to hear what you're saying. And this made me laugh. I don't know if this is serious or not, but it kind of made me laugh. I spent 3 years mastering Combine. Now Apple says use async await. What was the point? I chuckle because like the writing was on the wall with Combine. You know, they launched it in 2019 and then WWDC 2020, there was no what's new in Combine. 2021, there was no Combine updates. Basically, they launched it and didn't update it. And Swift is open source, so this whole async await thing, we knew that was coming like 2 years prior. So if you spent 3 years mastering Combine when like it was pretty obvious what was gonna happen, that's on you. And both are true, right? Apple shouldn't launch a framework and then immediately abandon it. Like that is messed up. So both are true, but this Combine example just specifically kind of made me laugh. And then the App Store, casino run by algorithms. Yeah, this is the typical App Store stuff, right? The App Store review is very inconsistent. I have my own nightmare stories with that. So yeah, can't argue here with the App Store stuff. The just learned SwiftUI gaslighting. Again, this one I totally disagree with. Like I said, maybe this article is just all rage bait and I'm just really buying into it. That could be true. You can laugh at me if that's the case. But it says senior devs are told to start over. So if you've been working in UIKit for 10 years and you're told to learn SwiftUI, that is not starting over. For those of us that did make the leap from UIKit and imperative thinking to SwiftUI and declarative, yes, it is a major change. You have to rewire your brain a bit. It takes a couple months, for sure. I am not trying to minimize the big shift in rewiring your brain. However, that is a far cry from starting over if you have like a decade-long experience. Just a couple months, learn it, work with it. Your brain will start thinking in SwiftUI rather than imperative in UIKit. So I think that's a bit harsh that you have to start over. And he says SwiftUI still can't handle complex navigation, fair, or deep customization. My argument is SwiftUI is not supposed to do deep customization. Like the trade-off of having everything be so easy to build is that you're kind of on guardrails and you lose the deep customization. But Apple still gives you the option. If you want deep customization, you can go UIKit. So my argument is like SwiftUI is not supposed to do this. Like that is by design. And he says, devs with a decade of experience are forced to compete with bootcamp grads. Again, this one triggered me. I'm like, dude, if you have a decade of experience, you're not competing with bootcamp grads. You're gonna mop the floor with them and run circles around them. Even if you are in UIKit and don't know SwiftUI yet, like this is not even a fair fight. So yeah, I reject that. If you have a decade of experience, you should not be concerned with bootcamp grads. Burnout culture, crunch time, every time. Again, some could argue this is a feature, this is a bug. You're doing that rush to build the new APIs for the new iOS 26 release. Like we all just went through that. I kind of like that time. Yes, it is stressful. Yes, it is rough because you are dealing with beta software. Again, I think it's a feature, not a bug. That's what attracts me to this, not dissuades me from it. But again, people are obviously seeing this differently. This is why I wanted to share this. I know I'm probably in my little bubble. The salary ceiling, that is for sure true. Like if you're back in a full stack, you can go to architect, cloud specialist, DevOps. There's like higher levels. Whereas if you're a senior iOS engineer, like you're pretty much capped unless you go to a manager or quit. So that is for sure true. And then tooling trauma, typical Xcode stuff, which is fair, except this made me laugh. Source control, merge conflicts and storyboards, have fun. That is true. Merge conflicts and storyboards suck. And it's 2026, like almost. What are we doing with storyboards here? And again, like I said, you're working on a decade-old code base. I know it's probably impossible to just rip out your storyboards. You're probably stuck with them. But I guess my big pushback against this article is it does come from the perspective of someone working on a decade-old code base that has to deal with storyboards. So yes, that would be insanely frustrating. But my argument is this is not indicative of most of iOS development, right? You have huge companies like the Ubers, yes, that makes up a ton, but then you have all the medium-sized companies, small startups, indie devs. So I would argue this is not indicative of iOS development as a whole. This is like just a smaller piece of the pie. And then, the cool factors faded, that's true. In the early 2010s, like 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, like iOS dev was the thing. Now, we're all into the whole AR, VR, AI, all that stuff. iOS development, it's become a maintenance job for legacy apps. Again, that's a small portion of iOS dev. Why some devs are still thriving and how. This But to me, this is the whole thing, right? The ones who stayed adapted brutally. And back to what I was talking about, like the only constant in this job is change. Like that's what you signed up for. I don't know if you've seen the movie Moneyball about the Oakland A's and the baseball team from the early 2000s. He has this line, he's like, adapt or die. And I love that line, and that really applies to like our world, like adapt or die. So yeah, the ones who stayed adapted brutally, like yeah, that's kind of the point. You can niche down and specialize in certain topics. You can go indie, build your own apps. You can be a consultant. But he says for every success story, there are 10 devs quietly quitting. And again, I think this is a feature of our profession. You can do the large company, medium company, small startup, independent contracting, indie dev, consulting. There's so many different paths you can take. I just believe that like you can make one of those work for you. So I thought it was an interesting juxtaposition compared to the article we just covered about this new era and all these sweeping changes. And again, that excites me versus the dark side of iOS development. You know, other people think differently, or they see this constant change differently, and it is causing them to quit. So I want to get your thoughts, your opinions in the comments on both these articles side by side. How do you feel about that sort of thing? And speaking of all the new stuff, here's an Apple article about Apple's foundation model frameworks unlocks new app experiences powered by Apple Intelligence. And essentially I want to share this so you can look at some apps that they've highlighted, how they're using foundation models to give you some ideas to maybe implement it in your app. Because like I said, of course, it's not going to be the same as implementing ChatGPT or Gemini, where you have this huge model up on the server. Remember, you have a small model, private, on device, that can work offline in your pocket. So think of it from that lens, and you can build some interesting features that are very unique that only Apple can do on the iPhone, because again, it is private on the device and you have access to their calendar, their health data, their contact, their journal entries, all the stuff that is actually on device. So it's a very unique value proposition. So hopefully reading through this article will give you some ideas on how you can use it for your app. So the Smart Gym app uses it to describe a workout and turn it into a structured routine with sets, reps, rest times. It can also provide a workout summary. I'll just give you a couple. Stoic, this is the journaling app. So leveraging the foundation model framework, users can have hyper-personal journaling prompts that are generated from their recent entries. So if you're feeling sad or low mood, the prompt will be like, hey, you've been feeling sad lately. How's it going today? Or whatever the journal app prompts you. But again, that is something you can only do. Well, you could do it on ChatGPT, but now you're sending everyone's personal private journal up to OpenAI servers or Google Gemini servers. They probably don't want that. So again, an advantage of being private, on device, offline, is you can use the user's highly personal, sensitive data to create great experiences for them. So yeah, read through this article for a bunch of different examples on how you can use foundation models, and keep an eye out because I think foundation models are a big deal, and I'm starting work on a course all about foundation models, and it should be out in a couple months. And I want to share a fun story to finish up. For those that are new here, this will be a new story for you. For those that have been around for a minute, this will be a fun trip down memory lane, because if you're like me, I watched this unfold in real time. But it's from David Smith, prominent indie dev, Widgetsmith. 5 years later, a TikTok video changed my life. You could argue this might have been the birth of TikTok marketing back in 2020. Right now, it's kind of like the norm, it's common, but maybe one of the first instances of a TikTok really blowing up an app and changing an app developer's life. So to summarize it here, I highly encourage you to go read through the story. He was building Widgetsmith, which allowed you to create custom watch complications on your app. Another fun fact, SwiftUI was actually kind of born out of like watchOS, and these watch complications were one of the first things that were like completely SwiftUI. So he's working on this custom watch face complications app, and then in iOS 14, Apple announced widgets, which is very similar except for iPhone, because widgets are also SwiftUI only. So he decides, I'm gonna create kind of Widgetsmith, but for widgets, where you can create custom widgets and put them on your home screen. So he builds this, he launches, he talks about how he's been through this, before. He had very managed expectations. He felt like he was building a niche product for niche users, like didn't think this would take off at all. So he launches it, posts about it, and then like kind of goes on vacation, as one does after you've been working all summer, getting your app ready to release with the new OS. And he says, right, this was the 59th app he launched, so he knows the process, right? You see a little swell of interest in the first few days, things settle down, stable out, and then you grow and build the app. But this time was different, because he said that Friday, September 18th, he woke like normal, the day was going normal, but at some point people started saying like, hey, I saw your app on TikTok and it's kind of going viral. And then here's the TikTok. And if you remember, back in iOS 14, like yeah, we can do all the tinting now and all kinds of crazy stuff on our home screen. But back in iOS 14, when widgets were brand new, this was really the first time users could start customizing their home screen. So this genre of TikTok, the aesthetic iPhone home screen due to custom widgets and everything, really blew up. It wasn't just one TikTok that did it. It was like a whole TikTok trend that really blew up. I think there's a couple other widget apps as well. There was some fast followers once they saw Widgetsmith's success. But yeah, it was a huge like trend back in the day. So I would love to experience this one day, I think. Be careful what you wish for. But he says, then I opened my help desk page and I was shocked at what I saw. There were new emails coming in at a rate of several per second. Like he said, I literally couldn't like click on them. So it had taken off in a way he never expected. It was #1 on the charts, changed his life, like he said. I don't know if he's ever said the amount of money, but I'm sure it's at least 7, probably multiple 7 figures. But the cool thing is like 5 years later, he said, I wasn't really sure if it would be a flash in the pan, right? This meteoric rise by a meteoric crash, just a fad, just a trend that you rode. But 5 years later, he said it is not a flash in the pan. The usage and user base continue to grow. And as of my writing, the app has around 131 million downloads. So awesome success story. Again, Dave's a great guy. Love to see it. But yeah, fun little story and maybe the origin of the whole TikTok marketing. You never know. Maybe this is the origin story. But yeah, it was fun to watch unfold in real time. So if you're new here, it's a fun story to go check out. That wraps it up for this episode of Swift News. We'll see you in the next one.